Motorsportweltmeisterschaft bei Eurosport wird Ihnen präsentiert von Ford. In Verbindung mit Champion, Pioneer, Hitachi, 11, das Benzin der Weltmeister und Goodyear.
Hello and welcome here on Eurosport. John Watson and Ellard Kalf bring you the first qualifying session for Sunday's French Grand Prix live, and of course it's to be seen here on Eurosport. First man out on the circuit was the man who had an interesting first session this morning. John?
Alain Prost was a very rare sight here at Manicourt in the 1.5 unofficial session this morning, because after 3 laps a computer programming fault in his new ABS braking system caused him to spin and stall the engine when he was under braking into the Adelaide hairpin, and that was on his second flying lap, and in fact that was the end of Alain Prost's session, and he is very keen indeed, Allard, to get out and really to go for that pole position, which almost by rights is going to be his. And in fact one would assume that the performance we've seen from Alain Prost 3 weeks ago in Canada, he's not going to have too much difficulty in achieving that aim.
Fastest driver this morning was teammate Damon Hill, who was a 1/10 of a second faster than Ayrton Senna, and that 1/10 of a second is the closest Ayrton Senna has been in any timed or untimed session so far this year. A good performance as well from Mark Blundell, and not only Blundell, also teammate Martin Brundle, 3rd and 4th on the circuit where the Ligier team lives.
Well, with the amount of testing available to the Ligier team at Manicourt, you would expect them to be competitive, and remember they've got the same engine, the RS5, that's the latest version of the Renault V10 that Alain Prost has. So really it's just down to the Ligier team's technical ability, and one big advantage that Ligier have here at Manicourt, and it's an advantage really I suppose other teams might well share, is the nature of the circuit itself. It is very, very smooth indeed, and therefore the stability of a Formula One car is much, much more consistent all the way around the lap. But still, nonetheless, a fine effort from Mark and Martin, and they will definitely want to maintain, consolidate, because it is vitally important for them to get a result here at Manicourt.
3 British drivers in the top 4, and also a British driver who was slowest this morning. Derek Warwick did not complete 1 flying lap. He had problems with the footwork Mugen Honda, who is actually running in an active form here.
Well, again, footwork, like many teams since Canada, have been spending a lot of time testing, and footwork were up at Silverstone on I think 3 separate occasions, testing both the passive and active car, both back to back. And really they did something interesting. They brought in Mika Häkkinen. He is McLaren's reserve driver, but he understands the McLaren system, which is what footwork have on their car. And I think the problem that footwork face is that they've bought a system rather than developing their own system, so they don't fully understand it. And I think unless you actually understand what you put on your car, well, their solution was to bring in Mika Häkkinen, and I must say the team were extremely impressed by the feedback and Mika Häkkinen's pace.
We'll go down through this morning's top 10. Michael Schumacher was 5th, Carl Wendlinger 6th, Eric Comas 7th, and John, maybe a surprise, 8th fastest time for Thierry Boutsen in the Jordan.
Well, I'm sure there were large sighs of relief, because this is without doubt the best performance we've seen from Thierry Boutsen in his time at Jordan. But also this is a critical Grand Prix for a number of teams, including the Jordan team, because they really have to score at least 1 point here to avoid dropping out of the top 10 teams. That's the means by which the Formula One teams devise their methods of payment, and also for the long travels, the ones to Japan and Australia in particular. So it's a vital race for Jordan, for Tyrrell, for footwork, for the Lola, or the Lola BMS Ferrari team.
A 1:16.315, that would put Alain Prost 2nd fastest this morning. So although the man only did 3 laps, John, I think he's getting on right with the program.
Well, I have no doubts whatsoever that Alain Prost will have pole position, and this is on his 3rd flying lap, 4th flying lap now in fact, and really it's a matter just of how quickly will Alain Prost get down to a time before he has to come into the pits. Remember, he only has 2 sets of tyres. He's only permitted 12 laps.
Well, Damon Hill's gone faster, a 1:15.120, and that is a full second faster than Damon achieved this morning, although 1.3 seconds slower than last year's pole position time set by Nigel Mansell, that 1:13.8, but a 1:15.1, a very good performance by Damon Hill.
And also a fine performance from Rubens Barrichello. He's now 4th quickest, 1:17.347. And Barrichello really responding, first of all, from the pace of Thierry Boutsen, but secondly, again, from this intensive testing program Jordan had been involved with. And in fact, what they've done is go back to a lot of the parts that they discarded in the early part of the season, and they've got a mix and match of parts they brought out to Canada, the revised nose and front aerodynamics, but they've got the early '93 season rear suspension.
Another small improvement from Damon Hill, a 1:15.051, and we're riding with the Brit, who some people believe he will win his first Grand Prix at Silverstone, but we're a long way away. First, we've got the French Grand Prix to deal with, and Damon, is he going to be faster? He's a little slower on that first intermediate, and it's funny because we've seen most people fairly close on that first intermediate all morning, John, and then they lose speed during that second and third part of the circuit.
Well, Damon's on his 5th lap, and this is of course his first set of tyres, and it's around about this time you would anticipate that little bit of edge that you have with a fresh set of tyres disappearing. Now traffic ahead of him, and in fact when he began that lap going through that very, very fast right, the double right following the pits, there was traffic, and now I suspect that Damon may well choose to come back into the pits. There's nothing to be achieved any further. One of the 2 Lotuses, and Damon, well, he's going to stay out. I don't really know. I think for me he's wasting time doing this. He's got traffic ahead of him. This is another lap in which really he's not going to get the clear lap that you need to try and improve, and he's going to catch up to this. I can't determine one of the Minardis or footwork. So Damon really, I think, wasting a lap where he could have come into the pits and conceivably put on a fresh set of tyres, waited for the circuit to be a little freer, and try and consolidate on his provisional pole position.
Which he still has. Alain Prost has done 4 laps, the same amount as Damon Hill has done, and he is still some 7/10 away from the man you're riding with. Other drivers that have been out, Mark Blundell is 16.8, that's a big improvement over this morning. Rubens Barrichello is 4th, Aguri Suzuki in 5th, then Johnny Herbert and Ukio Katayama in the Tyrrell 020, and that is last year's car. Ken Tyrrell and the team decided that this was not the place to debut the new 021.
Yes, the Tyrrell team are coming to terms with active suspension, and again, like virtually every British-based Formula One team, have spent a lot of time at Silverstone testing and learning about the complexities of active ride or ride height control, depending on how you've actually approached that particular problem, is very, very difficult indeed, and it really requires lots and lots of miles logging of that information, then understanding the information, and between logging it and understanding it, it's very, very complex indeed.
Riding with Michael Schumacher in the Benetton. Schumacher 5th fastest this morning, just a little bit faster than former Mercedes teammate Carl Wendlinger, who is now following him.
And if we look back to last year, Michael Schumacher, let's say he wasn't one of the stars, certainly he provided a lot of the action and excitement just down here. This is into the Adelaide hairpin, and he was climbing all over the back of cars. Well, Michael Schumacher now a year older and a lot more mature, and really again looking to consolidate the Benetton position. I've just come from a lunch with Ron Dennis, the boss of McLaren, and one of the journalists at that lunch brought up the subject of Benetton being the most competitive Ford team, and Ron was very quick to point out that Benetton in fact haven't won a Grand Prix this season so far.
And again here in France, the McLaren team is likely the one to challenge the Williams Renault?
Well, now that Ayrton Senna has got himself back into the seat of a Grand Prix car, he did not take part in any testing whatsoever between Canada and this French Grand Prix. Now, that doesn't normally stop Ayrton very often because he is so familiar with the car, and really the Manicourt circuit does not present any problems for him. But McLaren pressing on and really looking forward to Silverstone, when they, to how we understand it, have the use of the 7 Series Ford HB that currently Michael Schumacher has been using throughout this season, and certainly for a part of last season. Of course, Benetton would hope that they will have something a little better to use than the 7 Series from the British Grand Prix onwards. And in fact, last Wednesday I went to Cosworth along with a number of other journalists, and we were given an insight into that Ford HB engine, and we were given broad outline of some of the developments that are currently going on. And for example, one of the things that Benetton will probably have use of before the end of the season are the cylinder heads from the XB. That's the IndyCar Ford engine, very similar in concept to the Formula One engine, and in fact those are the cylinder heads that are also used in the Formula 3000, the AC engine that Cosworth made. Twin spark plugs is another possibility, as well as twin injectors, and Cosworth are very, very confident indeed that in the right circumstances, i.e. they mean in the right team and in the right chassis, they could challenge for the lead. They're not prepared to accept that because the Ford HB doesn't produce the outright horsepower of their principal rivals, the Renault. They still feel that they've got sufficient, that in the right situation, right circumstances, they can take on Williams and Renault and beat them head to head.
Well, we look at an opposite lock, Michael Schumacher, who is currently in 3rd position behind Alain Prost and the man who is still fastest, Damon Hill. Mark Blundell is in 4th and Martin Brundle is in 5th. Jean Alesi 6th, and Alesi is celebrating another 2-year deal with Ferrari. It's now all official. The press release has been out and apparently everything has been signed. John?
He was delighted, and we saw him last night talking to Eddie Jordan, of course, the man who brought Jean Alesi through Formula 3000 and gave him the opportunity to drive for the Tyrrell team. And Jean was, well, just delighted with the deal. He said, I'm delighted on 2 parts. The first part is I've got a very good deal, a very good financial contract. But the thing that pleased him most of all was, but I don't have to pay any of it over to you, Eddie Jordan, because our agreement has now passed, so all of it is mine.
Damon Hill is the fastest driver here in Magny-Cours. Alain Prost is 2nd fastest. 3rd, Michael Schumacher, and then the Ligier twins. That's the situation. We're going to take a short commercial break. Please join us after that here on Eurosport.
Keiner hat mehr Rennsporterfahrung als Goodyear. Und keiner weiß besser, wie man siegreiche Formel-1-Reifen herstellt. Dieses Wissen fließt auch in die Konstruktion der Reifen, mit denen sie fahren. Alle Goodyear High-Performance-Reifen basieren auf Formel-1-Technologie, um ihnen mehr Leistung, höhere Sicherheit und bessere Bodenhaftung zu bieten, wo auch immer sie unterwegs sind. Reifen für die anspruchsvollsten Fahrer der Welt. Goodyear. A change for the better.
Der Ford Escort hat wieder einmal gewonnen. Die Akropolis Rallye. Der Ford Escort. Wir fahren Rennen. Sie das Ergebnis.
Champion. Ein Sieger in jedem Motor, in jedem Auto. Champion.
Eurosport Live.
Welcome back live here on Eurosport, and everybody is waiting for this man to go out. Ayrton Senna, who qualified third here last year on the 1:15.199, and there he goes. He's got a better, that 1:15.051. That still is the fastest time here in Magny-Cours, set by Damon Hill on his fourth lap earlier on in the session.
Well, if you look at Damon's time, and he's about 1.2 seconds faster than he was on this 1.5 hour session earlier in the Friday morning. So one might anticipate Ayrton Senna, if he can carry forward that 1.2 seconds, being somewhere between Damon Hill and Alain Prost. That's the, if we can assume that that second plus will be as generous to Ayrton Senna as it has been so far to most people, and we are seeing improvements generally from the earlier morning session from Michele Alboreto in his Ferrari-engined BMS, and this a little bit of a moment for Michele Alboreto, one that I'm sure he would feel he could well have done without. Is he going to go into the gravel trap? He's head well, and he is into it, and I think that's the end of the session for Michele Alboreto. He is well and truly, well, there you go. You see, he's managed to get himself out of it. That's experience. There's a Grand Prix driver who's some 170 or so Grand Prix. He knows how to get himself out of a gravel trap and continue. Now, whether he's kept the engine running, we don't know. We've got a freeze frame there, but Ayrton Senna on his out lap, and Senna fully aware of how crucial this Grand Prix is to his championship hopes, and having watched Prost win in Canada, as he stood by the sidelines when he had an alternator problem, and that led to the battery finally having no more power, will want to contain as much as possible the progress of Alain Prost. And now Senna on his first flying lap.
Well, John, he's picked quite a good time because there's only 5 cars out on the circuit at the moment. So he's got most of the 4.2 kilometers to himself. It's very spaced out, and another guy who's out is his teammate Michael Andretti, who's currently in 16th position. And Andretti complained of understeer this morning and basically said the car was undrivable.
Well, I think Michael's had a great deal of problems with his car throughout the season, and one of the problems he's contended with, had to face, has been the back end of the car. In fact, he felt insecure. He wasn't confident to really lean on the car and open the throttle when he ought to. He's now got the opposite problem, and he's got a problem with that. He can't open the throttle because the front end isn't gripping. It's washing out, and in these meandering long corners here at Magny-Cours, the last thing you want is too much understeer.
Ayrton Senna going through the chicane, and then this is his first lap, a 1:19.109, and that is 15th position, as we just saw on the screen. Now, this lap and the next lap, John, are supposed to be the quick ones.
These certainly will give us an indication as to the kind of pace Ayrton Senna is going to be able to provide. And as he comes down, this is the fastest part of the circuit, coming down into the Adelaide hairpin. And in fact, Ayrton Senna wasn't so fast there this morning, 177 miles an hour, a full 10 miles an hour slower than Damon Hill. And that's an indication more about the amount of downforce McLaren are running on their car than the respective performances of the Renault V10 and the Ford V8. So, and again, you hear traction control working. Senna's accelerating out of those tight looping corners on the infield of this very compact circuit. Not the most imaginative piece of racetrack anywhere in the world, but this is the form that these new circuits tend to follow now, trying to pack as much distance into as small an area as possible. And this is the final right-hand hairpin onto the start-finish straight. 17.741, 10th place, and expect further improvements on this lap, the third flying lap. And of course, now the big worry he will have is if he does find traffic, that will have a halting progress for him.
Ayrton Senna on his way to the first intermediate, 0.9 of a second slower than Damon Hill, and that is much closer than he was earlier on. And as John said, that is an indication of how much downforce and engine power you have here at Magny-Cours. Damon Hill still at 1:15.051, that is still the fastest time. Damon's done 6 laps, Alain Prost has done 5 laps, but remember, Alain Prost missed the entire 90-minute session this morning. Michael Schumacher is still in 3rd position, while Mark Blundell is a little bit faster than Martin Brundle, and they are 4th and 5th.
Well, Senna was quite a lot slower than Damon Hill, that second intermediate point. So Senna really has not made the progress that we've seen from everybody else so far. 1:17.312, and that brings him up to 7th place, but fully 2.3 seconds away from the provisional pole of Damon Hill.
And of course it's much slower than he did this morning, John, when he did that 1:16.3.
Indeed, we're looking at Michael Andretti now, Ayrton Senna's teammate, and this now coming down the long straight all the way down into the Adelaide hairpin. .4 kilometers per hour.
Well, 286 is quite a lot slower than the fastest drivers here today. And talking about top speeds, John, we've got a couple of intermediates, and if you look at the top speed on start-finish, or actually the speed at the finish line this morning, fastest man out there was Fabrizio Bobazza.
And big surprise, but really what's rather sad is that this appears to be the last race for Barbazza, assuming that he gets through qualifying and makes it in to the 25 cars that will actually take part in Sunday's Grand Prix, because we understand from the British Grand Prix in a week's time, his place will be taken over by Pierluigi Martini. And we met Barbazza last night, and he was very phlegmatic about it, but very disappointed at the same time.
Riccardo Patrese, who has not been out yet in this session. Riccardo, who was 10th fastest this morning on a 1:18.0, and that was 0.2 of a second slower than teammate Michael Schumacher, who is now in 3rd.
And Ayrton Senna is up to 4th place. He's got into the 1:16s as he was this morning, but still 0.4 of a second away from that time. But currently on the 2nd row of the grid alongside Schumacher, and we're gradually seeing the normal positions beginning to be sorted out, with the 2 Williams currently on the front row, and then Schumacher and Senna in the 2nd row. Really the oddity, I suppose, at this time are the 2 Ligiers, with Mark Blundell and Martin Brundle 5th and 6th, and literally you could only split them on the stopwatch by thousandths of a second. Jean Alesi in the revised Ferrari 7th, and Rubens Barrichello in his Jordan Hart in 8th place.
Looking at Derek Warwick, the man who did not complete a flying lap this morning. Another fairly relaxed man. Here we look at a replay. Probably, I would say, this is going to be another opposite lock. Let's slide the car onto that main straight. And John, to get a fast lap, you don't want to slide the car here. You want to be really precise, get the power done, and be fast on this piece, isn't it?
I think what happens, and maybe the reason why we've seen Barbazza quickest at this relatively slow part of the circuit, is that when you want to start a flying lap, it sometimes is better to come into the corner that little bit slower but pick up the throttle early and drive the car right, as opposed to when you're on a flying lap, to come into the corner faster, maybe scrub speed off by sliding the car. And I think that's the explanation I would be comfortable with believing. But nonetheless, it was an interesting opportunity to compare the times of those 26 cars this morning. In fact, JJ later was second quickest, and he's a man who does like to slide a car around a great deal. And then the first of the Williams, Damon Hill, in third place.
Derek Warwick trying to catch Johnny Herbert at the moment. Warwick, who is not yet into the top 20 with the footwork Mugen. And there is Fabrizio Babazza. His session has ended. He is in 20th position on a 1:21.112, but that will not be fast enough to qualify, I would say, here in Magny-Cours. And a very sad end for the first session of Fabrizio Babazza. Currently dropped down to 21st because Derek Warwick is up to 19th on a 1:20.536. So Warwick, together with Prost, a man who's going to do quite a lot of work during this 1-hour official qualifying session.
But at least Derek Warwick does know his way around here, because he's raced here in sports cars, and those races somewhat longer than a Grand Prix. So familiarity with the circuit, not a problem, but of course getting your car adjusted, a Grand Prix car adjusted, and particularly with the choice of passive or active suspension. And really, I suppose the team feel that right now is the time to make that commitment to running the car officially, rather than spending the time they've been doing away testing in private.
Top 8 disappearing from our screen, and here is a man we like to do a lap with. Straight into 5th position, Jean Alesi, a 1:16.8, and let's see whether he can provide another spectacular lap, John.
Well, certainly this morning we had a lot of it. Oh, and well, the back of the Ferrari, a lot of opposite lock-on as Jean Alesi exited what they call the 180-degree corner, and that's in 5th gear, his foot pushing right through the bulkhead, and he never lifted. And that's very typical of Jean Alesi, but certainly here in France, he knows the importance of a good pole position. He is the other, let's say, French Grand Prix driver who has got an outside chance of being a winner here this weekend. But Jean jives so hard, his head bent right into the corner of that familiar high handheld steering wheel. And now coming all the way back up to the Chateau d'Eau. This is the final long right-hand corner that leads downhill to the chicane, then to the Lycée, the 90-degree Lycée corner onto the start-finish straight. And Alesi, always fantastic value. Look at that. I mean, there's nobody I can say tries harder, or certainly gives the visual impression of trying harder than Jean Alesi. Well, in fact, it was a slower lap, all that effort, and part when he was coming around onto the back straight, when he got the car, the back wheels, in fact, were probably just over that strip on the outside of the corner. And here we see him now coming down into the final Lycée corner. And it's ever so easy when you make a little error like that, or you get the car sliding. Look at the amount of wheel movement, sawing away, looking for grip, trying to balance it. Now he's got his foot well into the throttle pedal, but of course with traction control, what you try to do with traction control, in fact, is find the point at which the car is about to break away. You get it to activate, and then that stabilizes the back end of the car. The engine and the computer reduce power, and one of the Riccardo Patrese driving back onto the circuit. I think it'll be straight into the pits for him.
Crossing the line at the moment, while Riccardo Patrese drives into the pits, is Christian Fittipaldi. Fittipaldi was 19th fastest this morning, and of course last year he had his accident here, and that made him miss a couple of Grand Prix, and Riccardo Patrese straight back to the Benetton garage. Damon Hill is the fastest man here in Magny-Cours. Then it's Alain Prost, Michael Schumacher, Ayrton, Jean Alesi and Mark Blundell. That's the top 6. We'll be back after the break.
Hitachi.
Let it out.
Eurosport Live.
Welcome back here at Magny-Cours, while we're looking at one of the Jordans going round the circuit, and Damon Hill is still the fastest driver here at Magny-Cours. He's done that 1:15.051 on his fourth lap in qualifying. Alain Prost is second, then it's Michael Schumacher, although he is a second away from Alain Prost. Ayrton Senna in fourth, Jean Alesi in fifth, sixth is Mark Blundell, and seventh Martin Brundle. Then it's eighth Rubens Barrichello, ninth Aguri Suzuki, and in 10th the first of the Saubers, and that is Carl Wendlinger. So not a lot happened here since we've left you with the commercial break. Johnny Herbert's run out of laps. He's currently in 12th position. He's got to come into the pits just like Riccardo Patrese is doing. Sorry, Michael Schumacher is doing, because Riccardo Patrese was already into the pits.
Michael Schumacher coming in, and he will probably sit it out for a few moments and have a fresh set of tyres to put on, and then really it'll be into the second part of this session, and things have quietened down on the circuit. People have run probably the optimum number of laps on the first of two sets of tyres. Sometimes what people want to do is make a little change. They will go out in that first set to confirm or not what the changes have brought to the car. But of course, with only 12 laps, and in particular here where the timing light is at the very entrance to the pit lane, there's effectively fewer laps to do than the actual 12 that are permitted for a time. And there, Kia Katayama, the two Tyrrell drivers over the past 3 weeks, I think, have probably done more miles than anybody else, as they've been pounding around trying to develop their 021. This is the new, this is the 92 chassis in its C, guys, but pounding away with the new car. And Kia still enthusiastic as ever.
If we look through the list of drivers, we see Terry Boutsen in 17th, just improving to 1:18.685, and Boutsen, John, maybe was a bit of a surprise this morning in 8th position, and he can't really match that time this afternoon.
Well, he did an 18.0 this morning, and his best to date, his quickest lap just a few seconds ago, was over half a second slower, whereas Rubens Barrichello, who was the slower of the two Jordan drivers this morning, has made substantial progress. He went from 18.225 all the way down to 17.347, so he's found almost a second, whereas teammate Boutsen has actually lost half a second. Well, Andrea de Cesare is just proving that it's still possible to spin a Tyrrell, and that's a fairly familiar place. If someone's going to spin here at Magny-Cours, that's one of the choice places right in front of the team, so they do see it. And Andrea, like Katayama, really trying very hard with equipment that is beginning to show its age. And really, I think the team desperate to get their new model into a race configuration and trim as soon as possible. Here we see Andrea exiting again. All of a sudden, over the curb, too much power, and traction control was unable to help them. Now that's the, traction control doesn't prevent you spinning. What it does is prevent the wheels from spinning when you're going forward. You can still override it early in a corner and get the car sliding, getting the back to break away. Once that's happened, it's still the driver's right foot that is the main control of the car, and Andrea's right foot this time wasn't quick enough off the throttle.
Andrea de Cesare is starting his 189th Grand Prix here, and he's never won one, and that is a record. Eric Comas was 7th fastest this morning. He now is 13th, but Comas has set that time on his second flying lap, John, and that I find remarkable. He's now on his 7th lap, but he goes out, does the time, and then can't repeat it. Now, whether there's traffic or anything else, we don't know, but we'll see.
Well, certainly traffic around any Grand Prix circuit is a problem. And, well, Comas just may have been fortunate. He got a clear lap on the second lap. And this time, he's currently 13th quickest. Philippe Alliot's teammate is in 15th place. Now, this morning, both the Lamborghini LaRussas were quite impressive. Eric Comas was 7th quickest. The time on was 17.9, so he's about 2/10 away from what he achieved this morning, but of course in terms of position substantially further down the field.
Eric Comas, a Frenchman living in London, starting his 36th Grand Prix, and his best finish actually was here a year ago when he finished 5th for the Ligier team. Ayrton Senna, the first man to go out on his second set of tires, and there is Alain Prost waiting for his car to get ready, psyching himself up to go for that pole position. Well, he's had pole in all the Grand Prix so far this year. You might as well think it's near a formality, John.
Well, I think out of deference to Damon Hill, it probably is a formality, and we've seen certainly improving performances and confidence principally from Damon Hill at every Grand Prix. And here at Manicourt, he's been very purposeful and done a very good job indeed for his team. But of course, Alain Prost literally only had 3 laps. He stopped on his 3rd lap, and a lot of time really just evaporated away. And Alain Prost is one of the drivers who likes to spend time in the car. He's very, very specific about how he wants his car set up, and he's very methodical about how he goes about achieving that. So having lost that time this morning, really he's having to go maybe somewhat blind to some extent, maybe relying a little bit on Damon Hill for information. And it appears that both drivers have fairly similar setups. Certainly a very free exchange of information takes place between the two drivers. And we have to wait and see whether Prost will be able to find that further 0.7 of a second. As in the meantime, Ayrton Senna is 0.9 slower than Damon Hill at that first intermediate point. That's just coming into the Adelaide hairpin, and certainly 0.9 of a second would help Ayrton Senna a great deal.
Well, John, he's currently only 4th fastest, and he's behind Michael Schumacher, who's done a 16.720, and Ayrton Senna has done a 16.782. So those two are very close indeed. Well, on the left of your screen in the box is Damon Hill. And I think, John, Damon is now waiting to see what Alain does, and then he's got to go out and maybe better that time.
Well, in reality, it's somewhat academic, because both Alain Prost and Damon Hill are almost assured of a front row lockout. And whether it's Damon on pole or Alain Prost on pole, in reality, from the team's point of view, it doesn't matter. What does matter, of course, is on Sunday afternoon. And while there appear, and we spoke to Richard West, the commercial director in the Williams team yesterday afternoon, there are no team orders. I have to say, I imagine there is an unconscious or an unwritten team order that says if Alain Prost can win, then he must be allowed to do so, to give him the best opportunity to accumulate as many points as quickly as possible, because in this business you never know.
Alain Prost, Ayrton Senna over a second already behind Damon Hill, and running very wide again. He did that on the lap before as well.
Certainly that is not the normal line into that very tight, that's down, they call it, well, there's no name for that particular corner in fact. So Ayrton Senna, another lap really that's gone by, and he's completing now his 7th lap. He will have in effect 3 more flying laps available to him. You see Senna again.
And let's see what Alain Prost is doing out on the circuit. Well, there he is. Oh, that doesn't look like the proper line through that hairpin, John.
Well, that's at the end of the straight. That's the Adelaide hairpin, and Prost, of course, just on an out lap. You can still see even the stickers on the tyre. As Prost now starts a full flying lap.
Whichever Williams is going to be on pole position, it is the 18th consecutive Williams pole position. The last time one of those cars was not on pole was Canada last year. So a full year of pole positions are going to be celebrated here in France, John.
Well, that's a pretty impressive record. We've seen other teams achieve it, of course, in the past, most noticeably McLaren. Now the pendulum has very much swung back to Williams and that fabulous V10 Renault engine. And it's interesting, you're comparing the 2 principal engines here this weekend, the Ford V8 HB and this Renault V10 engine. Different configurations, different sizes. The Ford is a very much easier engine to install. The V10 Renault engine is a longer engine, it's heavier, and that makes the job of designing and packaging your car that much more difficult as well. But with Patrick Head and Adrian Newey in charge of the technical side of things at Williams, this car is, believe me, very, very special indeed.
A 1:17.371 for Alain Prost, and I believe this is, well, this could be the lap. Let's see, let's look at that first intermediate. Close.
Well, 3/10 slower than Damon, but as you pointed out earlier, Allard, it's in this infield part of the circuit, and then once you leave that back onto the charge down into the last little very tight, very tricky 90-degree Ligier hairpin bend. And really, this is where the quality of Alain Prost really does, or ought to, show through. To wait and see what the second, in fact it's increased, so I hope we're not doing Damon Hill a misservice here, but certainly one would expect to have seen that gap between Damon Hill, Alain Prost reduced, but in fact it's increased. Alain Prost may well feel a little bit of frustration now, because look at the understeer. You could see the car as he turned in at the apex, the front end wasn't really gripping, it was washing away from that apex. That means that you've got to be a little bit more prudent with the throttle. You just can't get on it quite so quickly. And I suspect that that's the problem that Alan's facing all the way around here. In those low speed corners, the front may not be giving him quite the degree of grip that he wants to enable him to get on the throttle to drive the car out onto the straight down to the next sequence of corners.
Again, 0.3 of a second slower than Damon Hill. Now, can Prost carry the speed through this section of circuit? Let's look at that second intermediate time. Whoops, and there's traffic.
Well, that's the very thing Alain Prost did not want. And again, 2 cars, in fact, not just one. Well, he's passed one who pulled well over. Well done. Well, the 2 Sabres. And now it's 0.6 of a second. Again, he's the man that's losing time to Damon Hill, rather than being the other way around. We thought that Prost's experience and his expertise in car setup, an understanding of how to get out of a car better than Damon might do, and it's in fact Alain Prost, the man that's not maintaining that speed where really he ought to be.
Alain Prost completing lap 7 out of his 12, and well, the more laps he's using, the more we can sort of carefully say, like, are we going to see Damon Hill's first pole position here?
Well, we've seen Damon on provisional pole before, but of course we have to wait until Saturday afternoon's 1-hour session is concluded to know whether that will be the case. In the meantime, Alain Prost pounding away, and he's on now his 6th flying lap. You hear the traction control, very high degree of traction control being used here. Again, 0.6 of a second at that second intermediate stage. And I think this is really almost wasting time for Alain Prost. For 3 consecutive laps, he's really not been able to make any significant inroads. In fact, he's been slower than he was on his initial run earlier in this session.
Well, John, if we go and look through like the laps and the times of other drivers, we see that Aguri Suzuki has done his fastest lap on his 3rd lap. So has Barrichello, Blundell. All those drivers. Ayrton Senna has done it on his 5th, on his first set of tyres. Now, could it be that the sun's come out a bit more? It might be a little hotter. The track might have changed and might not be as quick as it was.
I mean, these cars are very, very sensitive to heat changes, and literally any reasonable sized cloud passing overhead can alter the track temperature, can alter how a car handles, and it is as sensitive as that when you're racing at this very, very high level. But Alain Prost seems quite content to stay out there and just pound away. We're waiting for that second intermediate time. On the last 3 laps, it's been around 0.6 of a second. He appears to me to have a little bit better grip. The position of the car on the circuit appears slightly better, but we have to see. Well, it's even worse, 0.9.
And when Alain Prost crosses start-finish, that will be the last time he will do so on a flying lap. This is Alain Prost's last shot at the provisional pole, and that was outbreaking himself, I must say, and he's coming in. That's it. Damon Hill will be on the provisional pole, and he deserves it. He's gone for it very early in the session. He was quicker than Alain Prost, and although Prost didn't go out this morning, let's see what happens tomorrow. It's good for his confidence anyway.
I think it's very good indeed, but I'm sure that this man will be into the Williams garage, out of his car, and inevitably the shutters on the garage will be drawn down, and immediately they start working on the problems that Alain Prost was encountering. To me, it looked like he didn't have the front end grip that he required throughout the lap. So Damon Hill provisionally quickest, Alain Prost alongside him, Michael Schumacher and Ayrton Senna on the 2nd row.
Well, John, while we look at the positions 9 to 16, I think the big question is Damon going to go out and try to beat his own time, while Carl Wendlinger does exactly the same what teammate JJ Leto did this morning, lose it on the braking for the Adelaide hairpin. Both Sauber drivers have been complaining of grip. Carl Wendlinger currently in 10th position, and JJ Leto, whoops, I've got a, oh no, he's in 19th position, and JJ's got laps to go. Wendlinger is nearly running out of laps. We're going to take a short break here on Eurosport. Please join us after that and see what Damon Hill is going to do for the last 10 minutes of this session.
die DEKRA-Leute gesagt haben, sie wären der große staatlich anerkannte Prüfdienst, da war ich skeptisch. Als mir die DEKRA-Leute ihre 30.000 Kfz-Prüfstellen vorgestellt haben, da war ich überrascht. Und als mir dann die DEKRA-Leute gezeigt haben, dass sie mein Privatauto genauso gründlich checken, wie ich das bei meinem Rennauto gewohnt bin, da war ich überzeugt. Die DEKRA, geprüft und für gut befunden.
Eurosport Live.
Welcome back here at Magny-Cours for the last 8 minutes of this first qualifying session for Sunday's French Grand Prix. Martin Brundle going out. He's got 7 laps to run. Teammate Mark Blundell's got 6 laps to go, but the man out on the circuit, we like to know what he's doing, is Damon Hill. Is Damon going to improve on that 1:15.051? Or is he going to find, John, that the track is actually a little slower?
It'll be one or the other, Allard, and one thing is for sure, Damon's confidence must be buoyed up right now, knowing that his pole position certainly is safe from his teammate Alain Prost. Well, Martin Brundle showing us how to lock up a left front on a Ligier coming into Adelaide Hairpin, and that won't do that set of tyres any great good. But going back to Damon, he can now in effect go out and do this for himself. He doesn't have the pressure of Alain Prost on him. Of course, Michael Schumacher has still 4 flying laps left. Ayrton Senna's run out of time. So in effect, what Damon does is really just very much for himself, and it's a wonderful situation to have, because once your confidence is rising and you can do in effect so many more things so much more easily.
Well, Martin Brundle is up against Luca Badoer, and Martin going very slowly through the chicane, now picking up speed again for another go. Whoops, and Alessandro Zanardi.
Hello, that's what I would call a tank slapper. Zanardi, the back of the car stepped out, he corrected it, then it went back the other way as if it was an overcorrection, then back again to the original direction. And when we were during a commercial break, we saw Carl Wendlinger have a very similar, very amusing moment for us sitting here in our commentary booth, but probably slightly unnerving for Carl Wendlinger. Martin Brundle, 7th place behind teammate Mark Blundell in 6th. And the gap separating these two Ligiers really is down to 1/1000th of a second or so. But of course, within the team, a lot of pride involved, which is the quicker of the two drivers. But also, there have been rumours circulating in some of the European press that one of the 2 British drivers at Ligier may be under pressure. And the story goes that the team's test driver, Eric Bernard, may well be in line for a seat for the remaining part of the year. Now, that's not being confirmed. In fact, it's been denied by spokespeople for the team. Martin Brundle, I think, now deciding to come in. No.
Well, he's done the same thing again. He's caught up with the Lola. There we see teammate Mark Blundell spinning. Is he going to spin, or is he going to go across the gravel? Well, he's missed a chicane, that's for sure.
Now what he's got to do is accelerate like mad to drive the car through the gravel and try and keep the car almost skimming across that gravel. Once your speed gets so low, and that's going to drag a lot, and that is going to make a real mess of the chicane. Anybody coming down directly behind Mark Blundell will find that part of the circuit very, very treacherous indeed. That's the penalty that Mark has provided for everybody else. He's extracted himself from the gravel trip, but of course that part of the track will be, it'll take about 4 or 5 cars to go through before it will clean up. There's teammate Martin Brundle and the Jordan of Thierry Boutsen behind. Boutsen down in 17th, and Martin Blundell in 7th. Well, there is Alain Prost.
But the only thing he can do, John, is go out and come straight back in again.
Well, he may want to do that, because it's not that he can go out and set a time, but he has been, I suspect, unsatisfied with the handling of his car, and this one out and in lap will give him an opportunity to see whether any change that the team have made has been a change for the better or not.
Damon Hill completed his 10th lap, so he's on his last flying lap, and then he's got to come into the pits. Well, so if Damon wants to go faster, this is the lap he's going to do it. But being in France, I suppose the director John will follow Alain Prost. Oh, he doesn't. Thank you very much. John, I find it interesting actually that the Williams team did not announce that we're going to run the ABS until it sort of failed on Prost's car.
Well, they've been running it a lot again in testing, and they spent again at Silverstone many days evaluating it along with other changes that they're preparing for here, the French Grand Prix, and of course at Silverstone in 1 week's time. And they feel sufficiently confident to run it in practice and in qualifying. The intention, as far as I understand, is that for the race itself they will revert back to a non-ABS system, and that is typical of the Williams team. They will not commit themselves to something in a Grand Prix unless they're totally confident of its reliability and its performance advantage.
Well, Damon Hill, that was his last shot at improving his time. He hasn't improved on it. He came within 0.8 of a second, so I think we can safely say that the track is actually a little slower than it was earlier on in the session. So Damon Hill is on the provisional pole position, as he's been on a couple of occasions. Let's hope for Damon that he can stay out in front and record his first pole position of his Grand Prix career. Alain Prost makes sure it's a Williams lockout, and it is a 1 second gap, John, between Michael Schumacher in third and Alain Prost in second, and that's massive.
Well, when you count up the race duration, 72 laps, that's an awfully long way, and of course we don't know yet what the situation is going to be in this Grand Prix, whether we will see tyre stops or not. Certainly the B compound, in my view, should be durable enough to go the distance. The question is, how will the performance be affected once the tyre does start to wear? As is usual, wear usually leads to a drop-off in times. Oh, and Michael Schumacher, you saw the car juddering up and down, and that was under heavy braking, and a little bit of frustration, I think, from Schumacher, and as he gets back underway. But the car had that sort of vertical hop as it came into the final part of braking. Here we see it again. And what happens? Does he lock up first, or does the car start to jump first? Well, yes, you see it beginning to pump up and down, and he's turning in with the brakes on, and the whole combination of jumping up and down and the rear brakes probably having a bias. Under braking causes the spin.
While Schumacher is in third, Ayrton Senna is in fourth, Jean Alesi fifth, Mark Blundell sixth, Martin Brundle seventh, Rubens Barrichello, his best qualifying performance ever in a Formula 1 car, in eighth, Aguri Suzuki, a good performance from the Japanese driver, in ninth, Carl Wendlinger is 10th and Taubers, Riccardo Patrese 11th, then it's Johnny Herbert in 12th, Eric Comas and Philip Elio, both must be very disappointed, being 13th and 14th, Alessandro Zanardi on his first visit to this circuit in 15th, and Michael Andretti, well, that is a disappointing performance for the American. Thierry Boutsen dropped away from 7th to 17th, Gerhard Berger is 18th, 19th Derek Warwick, 20th JJ Leto, 21st Christian Fittipaldi, Okio Katsuyama is 22nd, 23rd Andrea De Cesaris, 24th and still qualified Fabrizio Babazza, and the only non-qualifier so far is Michele Alboreto, because he's behind teammate Luca Badoer, and that is the situation here in Magny-Cours. And John, I think the only surprise really is drivers that should have been up there, that's not, like Berger.
Well, you'd expected to see Gerhard Berger alongside his teammate Jean Alesi. Berger again having had problems in the morning session and obviously having had problems this afternoon. But of course, it's one of the problems of Grand Prix racing, and particularly with these, what I describe as extremely high-tech cars, that if you have one little problem, it virtually can eliminate you from the proceedings in these limited 12-lap runs you're allowed in the 1-hour session, the official qualifying sessions. And really, it's been a very messy and sort of satisfactory season in general for Gerhard Berger. The fact that Jean Alesi is committed to the team for a further 2 years, though, is some indication that at least Alesi feels that there's reason to continue for a further 2 years. Now, Alesi, in my mind, would have been a driver very much in demand should he have chosen not to re-sign with Ferrari. And certainly he is unquestionably a driver who will go on to win his first Grand Prix, but win many Grand Prix, and has the potential, I'm sure, also to be a world champion. Well, whether Ferrari will give them that opportunity or not is always a question of speculation. But I do believe that now that Jean Todt has officially and formally joined Ferrari, we saw him here this weekend in his team gear, having cast off his Peugeot team gear at Le Mans 2 weeks ago. So the places, the ingredients that I think are necessary for the revival of Ferrari fortunes are being put into place. Now, whether that mix will make a good and successful outcome, we have to wait and see. But with John Barnard in charge of technical and Jean Todt in charge of the managerial and organizational side, I don't think you could get two better people.
The top 8, we look at it here on your screen with Hill on pole. Then it's numbers 9 to 16th, and well, Michael Andretti in 16th place. That is not a happy man. And there we see 17th to 24th with Fabrizio Babazza in 24th, what is his last Grand Prix start here on Sunday. Well, tomorrow morning, another 90-minute session here where Alain Prost can try and find that 0.7 of a second he is currently lacking to beat Damon Hill from pole position. That is the situation here in Magny-Cours. John Watson, Allard Kalf, thank you much for watching today, and of course we hope you'll be here tomorrow, same time, same place, here on Eurosport, where we have the second qualifying session live. Thank you very much for today. See you tomorrow. Bye bye.
Weltmeisterschaft bei Eurosport wird Ihnen präsentiert von Ford. In Verbindung mit Champion, Pioneer, Hitachi, 11, das Benzin der Weltmeister und Goodyear.